来るかな。来たら、こっち番組開始と。こっち番組開始と。こっち番組開始と。では、今日は HTML、JavaScript の続きから。本当は今日の5時までだったから期限強化なんだけど。
In this lecture, we're going to speak about arrays in JavaScript. I'm assuming you already know what arrays are, but if you don't, arrays are just a collection of data. In JavaScript, however, since we have dynamic typing, arrays take on a pretty interesting set of properties. So right now I'm in Sublime Text and I'm looking at script.js and I'm located in the lecture 50 folder. Okay, so let me close the browser and let's create an array. So let's call it var array and we'll say new array. Once I created the array, I could now set items into that array. And arrays are zero based. So I could say 0, and let's say in the first position, which is position 0, I'll place a string and I'll use my name, Yakov. In the second position, which is position 1, I'll place a number, let's say 2. In the third position, which is 2, I'll place a function, and let's say it's going to be a function that you could pass a name to, and let's put a semicolon there. And all of this function is going to do is just going to say hello and whatever the name is plus name. Okay, so in the third position, which is right here, or the fourth position, I should say, I'm going to place an object literal. We'll put a semicolon over there. And object literal will say course, that's the property name. And the name of the course is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, so here's my array. And if I do a console.log on the array itself, you'll see that we have the array, and as you can see inside the array, we have different types of objects stored there. Some are just primitives, and some are strings, some are functions, which are also objects, and some are just object. So because of dynamic typing, in JavaScript, I'm able to store different types of objects in the same array, which is not true of most languages. Most languages, when you have an array and you store data in an array, the data in one particular array has to be of the same type. And if you want to have more than one type, you have to separate it into separate arrays. And just like I set the values using this brackets operator, I can also retrieve the values using the brackets operator. So for example, I could say console.log, and I can output array sub1, or sub1 right here. So array sub1, meaning I want to go to the second item in the array, which is right here, and I want to output it to the screen using console.log. So if I save that, and you see it prints out 2. Furthermore, since at position 3, or really at index 2 here, we have a function, I can invoke this function very easily using the array notation. So I'll say array, and it's at position 2. So I'll say position 2. And now, since at position 2 is the value, what's sitting in here in this position 2 is the value of the function. So that's the function value. Not the return of the function, but just the function value. Which means, in order to invoke it, all I have to do is put parentheses after it. And once I do, I can save it and undefined. And the reason it says hello undefined is because I never passed name. So let's go ahead and say Yakov and save that. Now it says hello Yakov. But I can even do something more fun than that. I can actually pass in the array, because I already have Yakov stored right here. So I could say I'm passing in an array, and it's in position 0. So now what I'm doing is I'm retrieving position 0 of this array, which is Yakov's string, and I'm passing it to position 2 value, which is the value of the function. So the function is getting executed against the value Yakov. So if I save that, I'll get again the same thing, hello Yakov. Likewise, I could certainly retrieve a property of a literal object that is stored inside the array. So I could say here console.log, And I could say array sub3 or index 3, and I could say dot course, and that should print out HTML, CSS, and
その
JavaScript.
場合
Let's
は
go
実
ahead
践
and
の中身
save
がこ
that.
こだね。
And it says HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, I can also create arrays using a shorthand array notation. So let me go ahead and comment this out so it doesn't crowd our console. So we'll save it and we'll clear the console. Let's go ahead and say shorthand array creation. Okay, so what we're going to do is say var names, and we're going to create an array simply by providing
ベース
an
を
empty
入
brackets.
れて、
So empty brackets now creates an array in the variable names. And what I could do is I could start listing my names. Yaakov, John, Joe, let's see. Okay, so if I do console.log now, on the names, I should say that, or see that array right there, Yaakov, John, and Joe. So that works, great. So now you see there's two ways to create an array. One is kind of a
順
longhand
番でアレイ
notation
して
where you
やる
say
場合
new
と、
array, and the other one
単純
simply
大
by
して一覧
kind of
で
like an array literal, something like that. But you just use the brackets and you separate the array values by a comma. And again, I could put whatever I want in here. So if I wanted to, let's say, I can actually use spacing here like this. And if I wanted to, I could create an object here. So let's say I could create an object and say
で
name
きるかなと思ったらやっぱできる
Yaakov
んだ。
and
まあ、
comma.
ライブラリだ
There's
けだか
another
ら、
object here. If I wanted to have an object, we'll do name John. And I can actually leave it here because arrays are not restricted to have the same type. So if I save that, and I'll see object Joe, right?
まあ、オ
So
ブ
if
ジ
I
ェクトを
actually
そのまま
open
で
that
展
up,
開す
will
るは、
let me open this object and you'll see array Yaakov, name Yaakov, and the same one is, second one is name John. Okay, but let's undo that for now. Let's go back to the regular array we had before. And let's go ahead and loop over this array, printing out each name. Let's say hello to each name. So for that, we're going to use a regular for loop. We'll say var I
これは
equals
フォーループ
0.
で、バー i。
And we need to keep looping until it's the
え
end
っ
of
て
the
も
array.
今はいい
Well,
け
there's
ど、
three
まあ、これ
items
も
in the array. And each array object has a special property called length. And it's not a function, it's just a property that the JavaScript engine sets for you. So array
前
names.length
の i
will
から
give me
出
the
すと。
length of the array. In this case, it'll be 3. So what I'm saying is that I want my loop variable to be 0, 1, and 2. And when it's 3, it's no longer going to be less than the length of the array, and it will quit. Okay, so let's go ahead and print hello to the console. So we'll say console.log, and we'll say hello, space, and then we'll say names,
ネーム、
bracket I. So now every time through the loop,
これ3
the I
回分
is
表
going to
示できるよ
change
ね。
and is going to say hello to a different name. Let's go ahead and maybe comment that out so we don't see that on the console. And we save it and we say hello Yaakov, hello John, hello Joe. Now what's interesting about arrays in JavaScript is that they can even be sparse. So let's go ahead and make some room here. And I could say something like names, and I could say names 100, and I could set that value to be, let's say, Jim. So now
どうしてから
we
100で
have
や
an
ろうか。
array that has 0, 1, and 2 index and an 100 index. And in between, there's nothing there. So if I actually go ahead and take that here and paste that loop right here and
遊ぶ。
execute it, what we're going to see is it said hello Yaakov, hello
97
John,
俺だ
hello
け
Joe, and it starts
忘
that
れたんだ。
again. Hello Yaakov, hello Joe, and then 97 times it just says hello undefined. Because what we're doing here is we're saying I want you to retrieve names with an index of 4 and 5 and 6 and so on. And those
いいよ。で、これは、コーセラの JHTML。Git スイッチ HTML CSS と。で CT ウィーク。メイク dir のレクチュアのあれ コードの締め切りやるじゃあり。コードそのままにいいのか。ビジュアル作るコードをスクリプトです。で、あとは、pp 点レクチャーインデックスで言ってみるが、レクチャーアレイにコピーすればよしと。スクリプト JS に、これ今の55秒の、ここまでコピーして、貼り付け。で、こっちではコントロールと B。で、コードビルダーがこのワークスペースで、こう、ライブル JavaScript も有効。HTML ライブルと。なんでしょう。一応ライブサーバー入れるか。有効にするワークスペースと。で、コントロール Alt B。で、デバッグコンソールには今の同じ結果がこういう風に出てくると。これ消してもいいな。こういう風に全部捨ててきて、デバッグコンソールで同じよう。OK。じゃあ続き。
Indices just don't exist in this particular array, but 100 does exist, so therefore you see when it gets to 100, it prints out hello Jim. There is one more issue with arrays that you should be aware of, and we'll discuss that issue in part 2 of this lecture.
パート2。さて、アレイのパート2。これですかな。
There is one more issue that you should really be aware of when it comes to using a certain for loop with arrays. Let's go ahead and comment all this out, and I'll go ahead and copy my array one more time, and I'll just call it something else. I'll call it names2 maybe. Let's see, names2. So I have a names2 array, and again it says Yaakov, John, and Joe. Okay, so let's leave that aside for now, and let's create an object literal. We'll create obj, let's say my obj, and we'll create it as an object literal. We'll put the semicolon there, and we'll say name Yaakov. We'll say another property course, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, comma, and we'll say platform, Coursera. Okay, so that's good enough. So now there's something we actually haven't seen yet and I haven't shown you. And there's a special for loop that you can use to traverse the properties of an object. So this for loop looks like this. It's a for, and you declare it as a var, prop in my obj. So basically it'll say, I want to grab every property in my object. This is what this prop is going to be. So it's very convenient for objects because objects don't really have indices like an array does. It has properties. So let's go ahead and console that out. Console.log prop, and we'll say semicolon here. We'll add that in, and we'll add my obj, and we'll give it prop again. Since dot notation and the brackets notation are equivalent, I'm allowed to do this. So this lets us kind of calculate it.
じゃあ、このネームズ100はこの辺を からネームズ2イコール、そういう、まあ、まあ、こんな感じでできるし、レッド、me イコール、これ JSON 形式で、例えば、ネーム、違う、こうか。if you add コンマ、ボス、この、スラス、で、この、こうすれば、できると、コンソールを右で、で、この表に忘れる。で、ここを、こう、レッド、アイ、イン、ミーとやれば、まあ、ログ、カッコ i、カッコとすれば、これがプロパティネームになるはず。ここはもう、ロのスクリプト JS いいんだよね。ネームコスパターンだけ出せる。だから、ここはそうすると P の方がいい。P プラス、区切りをつけて、プラス、大括弧 P。行く行く。とりあえず。なるほどね。今やったことがここで見せ
in
る
the
と。
calculated property. Okay, so if I save that, and I'll see that it's printing out name, that's the name of the property, and the value, name of the property, and the value, name property, and the value. Okay, that's all great. Now we know that in JavaScript, arrays are just objects, and the indices are just property names. So technically speaking, I could use the same type of for loop on my names2 array as well. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's actually comment this out for a minute so we don't have it crowd our console. Let's make a little bit more room. Okay, so now let's say for name in names. So sounds pretty good. So we'll say console.log and we'll say hi, hello, and we'll say names and we'll use a computed property notation name. So every time through the loop, this name will be equal a different property of the array. So in the first time, it will be equal 0 because that's a property name of the array. The second time will be equal 1, and the third time it will be equal 2. So this should work. Let's go ahead and save that. And I messed up something here. Names is not defined. Of course not. Names2. Let's go ahead and say names2 here. Let's save that again. names2 is still not defined, and
ね。
that's because I didn't put names2 right here. Okay, so now it will work. So now it says hello Yakov, hello John, and hello Joe. But the problem with this for loop is that arrays are objects after all. So if, for example, there's nothing wrong with me saying names2 that greeting is equal to hi. Let's say I want to save a specific greeting that I want to use. So now if I use the same array,
そっか、
go
これっ
ahead
て
and
こと
copy
か
that and
ら、
say afterwards, hi. And now if I use the same array, and let's go ahead and comment that out for a minute and save it, what I'm going to get is hello Yakov, hello John, hello Joe, hello hi. Now the reason that is
グリ
because
ーティングスってなくて
the
も
greeting
入っちゃ
became
う
a
んだ。
property of the array, no different than a number 0 or number 2 or number 1 and so on. Greeting becomes a property of the array, and this for loop loops over the property names of the object. And since again, arrays are just objects in JavaScript, this for loop will loop over properties,
これが
even
結構い
over
い加減という
properties
か
that
楽とい
really
う
have
か。
nothing to do with the core data that we want to loop over.
今のところをやってみよう。まあ、let's name 2は下に持っていって、やっていることは一緒。はい、let names 2のコンソールのログのエロをプラス names はいと。これで一回実行すると、エロが起きる。エロ大括弧。はい。ちゃんと一回、どういうのが入ってるか見たいよね。で、普通にやると、あれここにプラスが抜けてるって。012とのツイートになる。で、例えば、names2 greetings イコール、例えば、はい。これでやると、ほんとグリーティングス入ってる。例えばそうすると、例えば、names2 10 greetings エロの中にこうして、プラス、これでやると、なかなか。じゃあ続き。Push the post. What is the following process code? Bar count equal by あるいはヤコブにハンドル012。前言われてレングス。レングスまで出すんです。だから3つだよな。で、送信と。クロージャー入った。
In this lecture, we're going to talk about JavaScript closures. Now, closures is a pretty essential topic to understand. In fact, without this concept implemented in JavaScript, something like Ajax wouldn't really even be possible. And believe it or not, closures is something you've already seen. So right now I'm looking at my Sublime text at script.js and I'm located in lecture 51 folder. So let me close the file browser. And let me give you an example that you've seen before. Let me create a function, and the function will call make multiplier, and we'll pass it an argument called multiplier. And in this body of this function, we're going to return, and what we're going to do is we're going to return a function. So we're going to say return, let's put parentheses around it so we could see it a little bit better with a semicolon at the end. And what we're going to do is we're going to return a function, function without a name. We don't need a name for it because it's just a value of the function. And the function that we're returning should be able to take one argument, let's call it x. And what we're going to do is we're going to return multiplier times x. So this function, make multiplier, is going to take a multiplier that is supplied to it, some number, and is going to return another function as part of its return value that is going to take an argument, a number, and is going to multiply it using the multiplier provided in the outer function. So let's go ahead and execute this function. So let's say var double all. We're going to double everything. And double all is going to be equal to make multiplier 2. So double all is now a function that doubles everything. So let's go ahead and say console.log double all, and let's say 10. And when we save that, and when I save that, it will go ahead and take 10, multiply that by 2, and we should see 20 over here. So let's save it, and 20 is what we see. Okay, great. Now let's for a second understand, how did this work out? The very first time we called a make multiplier, we passed it a value of 2. So now when we get to this portion right here, it's really no different than saying var multiplier right there equals to 2. That's really what's going on. So according to our rules, I should be able to use this multiplier inside of an inner function. So before I even get to the return, let's go ahead and create another function. Let's call it function, let's call it function B, and we'll just say console.log multiplier is, and we'll output the multiplier. And let's invoke the function right there. Now, when we invoke the function, let's go ahead and do that. Save it. We invoke the function and it says multiplier is 2. Now, how does the inner function right here B know that the multiplier is 2? Well, we spoke about what happens when a function is executed. When a function is executed, it gets a few things. Number one, it gets its own execution context, so it's isolated from everything else. Number two, it gets a special this variable. We spoke about that before. And number three, it gets a reference to its outer lexical environment. So when a variable is referenced inside of a function, the first thing it does is check whether or not this variable has been defined inside of its local lexical environment, meaning has the multiply variable been defined inside the B function? And the answer is it's not defined. And if it's not defined, it means the next thing that the JavaScript engine does, it looks at the outside lexical environment of this function. Well, the outside lexical environment of this function, meaning where it's defined, the outside of that is the make multiplier function. And the make multiplier function has that variable, so once it finds it, it goes ahead and uses it in the function B that we're executing right here. Now that's all great. Now let's take a look at our return statement. The problem is that our return statement doesn't really create its own execution environment, because this is not a function execution. This is just a function value. This is an object, a function that gets returned back to the caller of the make multiplier function. Okay, so if this is not an execution of the function, that means it doesn't get its own this variable. It means it does not get an outer reference. It simply gets returned to the caller. So now, when it gets returned to the caller in this line right here, so this variable is now equal to this function. And in the next line, when we actually execute double all and pass it at 10, this function is now finally being executed, which means it is now getting its own execution environment, and it is now in this line right here, it gets its own execution environment, and it gets its own outer variable environment, and so on. So how then can it possibly know what the multiplier variable is? Because at the time that this is executing, the make multiplier function is no longer in the execution stack. It's done. It returned whatever it needed to return, and it's no longer functioning. It's done. It's popped off the execution stack. Well, the reason this still works is because of JavaScript closures. Since a function like this is returned from inside of this function, JavaScript preserves its outer lexical environment memory space for this function, so this function can go ahead and produce what it needs to produce. So the multiplier is something that's still sitting in memory in lexical outside scope of this function. So even when we call double all, it will go ahead and execute this function. It will create its own execution environment. It will go ahead and look for the multiplier variable in its own execution environment. It will not find it. And it will then try to look for this variable in its outer lexical environment. And the outer lexical environment memory space will still remain even though the make multiplier function no longer exists. That's how we basically are able to trap or to close in whatever variables and whatever memory space is sitting outside of the lexical environment of this return function. And that's how closures work.
ここやっぱ試してみないとよくわからん。全部消して、これでいいか。ファイル。インデックスはここだ。一回閉じて。クリプト JS を JS にしたところで、1は、並べないか。J、クリプト JS で、クリプト 2JS でいいや。で、コードは下で、JS のスクリプト 2JS、これをコントロール。クロージャーです。ファンクションで、メイクファンクションで、メイクファンクでいいや。メイク、ジア、フリート、カッコ、X、イコール、リターンで、ファンクション、こうつけるか。ファン、カッコ、ネームでいい。イコール、リターン、GRE、ティングス、プラス、コンマスペース。スペース、プラス、こんな風にできるってことか。セミコロンの、セミコロン。こういうのでこれでもできるいいってことね。で、こうすると、レッド G1 イコール、メイクグリーティングスにして、例えば、ペローとすると、プラス、 コンソールログ。T1 は関数だから、これでできるはず。これで実行すると、Hello and は入ってないからね。ここに、ワールドと入れば、コントロール R 実行して、Hello ワールドが出てくる。やれと、G2 イコール、make greetings カッコ、例えば、Good night とできるわけだね。で、コンソール点ログ G2 カッコジャパン。あ、コントロール Alt B。あれコンソールできた。おう。ちゃんとできる。ということは、この下で返すファンクション。ファンクションのファンクション。プリント DR インクス。同じようにコンソール、ここのアウスで TR、グリーティングス。これはこの関数の中だからやるけど、ここでプリントとやると、ああ、グリーティングスの。グリーティングスの。コントロールアウト B。あら、デバッグコンソール。Hello and define。なんかそう、プリントグリーティングコンソールコード GREETING です。GREETING です。とりあえず、ここを一回アップにして、アンエクスペクトトークンどこで投げてるってのが入ってるって。あ、これがエラーが出てるからだ。ヘローのヘローがあると。コントロールワールド。ヘローで出てことのやつやっぱ。まあ、ここら辺はちょっとした切り替えだから、いいってことやね。じゃあ、レクチャー52。フェイクネームスペース。フェイクなの？
In this lecture, we're going to speak about a pretty common scenario and how to resolve it, and we'll look at some best practices as well. Right now, I'm in Sublime Text and I'm located in the Lecture 52 folder. Let me go ahead and close the file browser here so you can see a little bit better. And I'm looking at index.html at the moment. What I'm doing here is I'm actually loading three scripts one after the other: script1.js, script2.js, and app.js. So this happens a lot when you actually import a couple of libraries, and so those libraries could be something you wrote yourself, or it could be external libraries as well. But in this case, these are two libraries that I wrote myself, and they're very, very simple. The first one is just declares a variable name. It's my name, Yakov. And the
ああ、
function say hello. And the function say hello does nothing more than just
なるほど、
says
なるほど。
logs hello plus the name, and it'll just say hello, Yakov. Script number 2, which is what is declared afterwards, script number 2 is declaring a name John, and then it declares a function called say
スクリプト
hi,
ってコン
and
テキスト
all it does
が
again is just
ネ
logs
スペース
hi
さんなるわけか。
plus the name John. Now, app.js, this is the third one in the list over here. App.js, it invokes say hello. This is from the first one, says hello. So it should
まあ、な
say
るはず。
hello, Yakov. And then it invokes say hi, which is right here, and it should say hi, John. Let's go
こ
ahead
れ
and
は
save this and see what
52。
the console prints out. We save it and it says hello, John, and
まあ、そうだよ
hello,
な。
hi, John.
あとで
Now
レッ
that's
ドで
kind of
書き換えられ
strange.
るから、
Hello, John. It really should have said hello, Yakov, not hello, John. Now, why is this happening? Well, it's actually pretty simple why this is happening. If you look at our index.html, the first thing that the browser loads is
ここで設定し
script1.js.
て、
And script1.js
だからレッ
declares
ド
a
が出てくるよう
variable
になったわけ
name,
か。
and this name
グロー
variable
バル
is
スコープで
sitting
す
in the
な。
global scope. And this also declares a function called hello, say hello again in the global scope.
で、これをちょっとやってみましょう。プルスコードで、これは作ってなかったみクロージャー、バリエース。ここ抜けつけて、エラーが出るように、レッドの方に、レッドのネームイコール、フルブッキ。まあやってることでしたけどね。ファンクション、聖杯は1です。はい。学校。コンソール、ログ、ハイスペース、プラス、ネーム。バーナーで問題出ないはずだけど、ここはレッドにしてるから、そして、こっちはスクリプト JS だ。で、ヘロだな。A、H、ヘロ。ヘロプラスネなって、ウェイト、保存。そうして、これ名前を変更して、スクリプト JS。このまま実行すると、あれそこで何も出ない。インデックスもスクリプト 1.js のスクリプト 2.js。モジュール。モジュール4。JavaScript ネーム SPS ページ。で、ここにスクリプトを入れよう。タイプ、テキストの JavaScript。ここで、say hello。で、say これスクリプトに JS の方に、これのショートハンドアリクエージョンワーネームズとかは、分かったから消しちゃおう。1もレッド、ネーム、ゴール。いざ。これ考えなくていい。オフべきだったところを、ドローじゃなくて、ここは、MSP です。こっちの方をキラーとして、ワンの、say, はい、コンソール点ログの、はい、あと、キラー、ここまでやって、セーブして、インデックス中オープンチャルサーバー。ここでハテナ、要素のコンソール。ああ、そこで読み替え失敗しちゃってんだ。これは、この読み込みを切ってるから、読み込みか。一番読み込みかにして、ヘロー武器。デバッカーで、インデックス。例外で練習。これでもう一回。まあね、レッドだから2回目のリデコレーションでエラーが出ると。例えばここが、かけられねえ。スクリプト2の方のレッドじゃなくて、バーなら問題出ないから、このインデックスで、もうツアーポテトになるんだな。やっといてもう一回、レッドネームイコールキラー。ここは例外停止しちゃったから、タブを閉じて、もう一回、ファイルを開く。ビルトイン。プレビューかなこれでこう、ライブサーバー、これでバッカー、ステージバック、リモートメール、バークのプレビュー。VS コードにした。VS コード、PL スタディオインテリ。AI ハス有効です。14。やばと。プログラムで表示一回しちゃおう。 これでこっちでもうできるから、コンソール。エロー吹き出が出てる。ファイル、リソース。レッドになってるから問題は変わらずか。ということは、スクリプトになれば、ネームイコールキラーが保存して、リグレーションは変わらずか。そうすると、スクリプト1の方もバーにする。9番だな。これで、トレーラーは出る。コンソールは、一応表示はされるけど、まあエラーは出るよね。という話。戻ろう。
So when this executes, it will take whatever name variable is sitting in the global scope. Now, right after script 1, we're loading script2.js, which again declares name in the global scope, which basically means that at this point right here, my name equals Yakov gets overridden with name equals John. And then we declare another function, which is a little bit different name that says hi, say hi, and that is the one that prints out hi plus name. So by the time we get to say hello, our name variable has actually changed from Yakov to John. And what's going on is that one script is stepping on the toes of the other, basically. So how do we solve this situation? Well, one way of solving a situation is introduce namespaces. And a namespace is basically just a container for some functionality and for some declarations. The only thing is JavaScript doesn't really have namespaces that other languages have. However, in JavaScript, we could fake namespaces very easily. Let's go into script1.js, and instead of just saying Yakov here, let's declare a variable called var Yakov greeter, and we'll just make it equal to an empty object. Now, instead of just declaring name right here in the global scope, what I'll do is I'll declare name as a property of Yakov greeter. So Yakov greeter.name is and the function will be the same way. I'll just cut it out of here, and I'll say Yakov greeter dot say hello equals this function. So now I have Yakov greeter, and I can now refer to the name, and I can refer to say hello as through Yakov greeter. One more thing I need to change is this name right here really should be not just name, but Yakov greeter.name. Okay, so we're good here. If we go to now script2.js, we could do the same thing. We'll say var John greeter, and we'll make it equal to an empty object. And now everything else that we have in this file, we're going to start with, we don't need to declare a variable anymore because we already have one. We're going to start with this John greeter. So here it's going to be John greeter.say hi. And we're going to take out the say hi out of here. And this again is going to be John greeter.name. Okay, so now that we've converted this to a namespace, and now everything that we are referring to inside this in terms of the variable names and the functions are going to have to go through these namespace objects. So inside our app.js, in order to say hello, that's no longer going to work. So if I go ahead and save this, and save that, you can see here now it says that say hello is not defined. Well, it's not defined because in the global scope, there's no such function as say hello. However, there's an object that has this function attached to it. So if I say Yakov greeter dot say hello, and this will be John greeter .say hello, .say hi, and I save that. You can see how now it says hello Yaakov and hi John.
だってこれもこっち、これもこっちで、エラーが出るのを確認してみよう。つまり、ウキクリエイター。クリエイターなんでいいや。イコール、じゃあ、スペース。そしてこれが gret 点ネーム。で、gre 1点 say hello。これはファンクション関数オブジェクトになるから、これはグリードになるからディスネームで使えるんじゃないかなと思う。これでコントロール保存。そうするとこっちのsay hello がエラーになるから、インデックスのここがグリーター1 say hello となる。これで保存して、ブレイクポイントがこうなると、コンソール。はい、ヘロー不きと廃棄だを一応実行される。デバッカーによると、特に問題はなし。同じように、スクリプト 2.js。クリーター2イコールからのオブジェクトとし、だ。クリーター2ドットネームイコールキキだ。で、g i 2.say なんか i イコールファンクションのドットになる。で、このままでこっちへエラーが出るから、クリーター2.say はい。ここまで保存して、実行すると、コンソールには両方、そうか。違う違う違う。この場合、実装入れないとダメだ。で、確認のために、コンソールでログ ネームとすると、これを保存して、エンプティストリングなるのね。あ、はいが消える。ちょっと待って、もう一回。おかしい。グレーター2、ここはグレーター2じゃダメなのか？やっぱ、これは単なるセルフか、そうすると。いや、セルフだとあれだらしいな。多分問題は出るようにダメな気がする。はい、エンプティ。ここはそういうこと。やっぱダメか。ここはまだ外だから、あドットネームだ。じゃあ、こっちもですじゃなくて、別点ね。これとあれば別。一応グローバースコープとになるけど、これで、L を撃廃キラとなって、エンプティスリングになると。ない。なるほどね。じゃあ戻って、最後まで。
So that worked perfectly. So this is something that you could do in order to separate kind of your namespace and separate your functionality into separate files and also into separate namespaces so you don't step one upon the other. But there's something you could do to go even
こんなことをやる
further
ぐらいな
in
ら、
order to separate different variables that are sort of like private variables between different scripts and different execution contexts. And that's what we're going to speak about in part 2 of this lecture.
レクチャー52。
In part 1 of this lecture, we spoke about faking namespaces using JavaScript objects such that certain variables and functions can coexist in the global scope without stepping on each other's toes, so to
こ
speak.
れ、オブジ
But
ェク
there's
トを指
something you
定す
could
る
do
こと
to
で
go
関
even
数を
further.
化する。
A lot of the times when you have a bunch of functionality sitting in a script, a lot of it is not really something that you necessarily even want to put into some namespace. Sometimes you just want it to execute when the browser loads that JavaScript. You just want it to execute and kind of go away. So you don't necessarily need to put it in a namespace. So for example, if I didn't want to hard code the string say hello, if I wanted to, for example, let me cut it and say greeting, and this greeting, I just want to declare as a regular variable. So I just want that to be a string. So I just want to be able to use that string inside of my say hello function. Well, I could do the same thing, var equals greeting, in the script number 2 and say var greeting, except this time I want to say hi
今度はグリーティング
and
ズ、は
just
い、実際はい
substitute
だ。
it with greeting. Well, we kind of have
あ、
exactly
こ
the
れも
same
絶対
problem again, don't
問
we?
題が失敗
Greeting
出るか
now
も
is going
ね。
to be part of the window object, part of the global object in script 2. And in script 1, it's going to be, again, part of the global object. So once again,
当
I'm
然
going
同
to
じこ
now
とが
end
発
up with
生す
hi
る。
Yaakov, hi John instead of hello Yaakov, hi John. Well, one more thing we could do is introduce something called
まあ、これ普通関
immediately
数の中でや
invoke
るもんだけ
function
どな。
expression. Let's go to
そ
our
れがオブジェクトの中で。
app.js, and I'm actually going to comment this out for a minute and show you what an immediately invoke function expression is. I'm sure you've seen a function before that in this course that we've done, where let's say we're just going to go ahead and console.log, say hello Coursera. Okay, so in order to now for us to execute this function, we need to say a and put our parens behind it, right? And go ahead and save that. And now you'll see hello Coursera. And you also remember that I could save this function in a variable. So I could say var a equals function log hello Coursera, and this is exactly the same thing. If I save this, you'll see it will refresh and it'll say again hello Coursera.
このステッカー
Well,
だ
the
な。
way we execute a function is by putting these parens behind its name. Well, remember, function is just a value. This whole thing is nothing more than an object. It's a function object. So technically speaking, I could just wrap it in parentheses right here as just an object, right? So if I save it again, nothing really changes.
カッコでくく
Well,
るこ
how
と
do
で。
I execute a function
あ、
again?
これ
I
はオブ
execute
ジェ
it
クト
by
だよな。
putting parentheses right behind it. Well, then it follows that if I erase this variable right here, I can invoke this function right in
夢を
line
完遂化
by
し
just
た。
putting parentheses right after its declaration.
あ、読めるよ
So
ね。
this function is going to produce, this declaration right here is going to produce a function, and the parentheses right behind it is going to invoke it immediately. So this is what's called immediately invoked function expression, otherwise known as IFE. So immediately invoked function expression. It's an expression because this line right here, or this set of code, is actually something that produces a value. Thus, it's an expression, something that produces a value. Well, what value does it produce? It produces a function object. And then we're taking that function object and we're just putting parentheses right behind it. And that invokes that function object. And
まずオブ
therefore,
ジェクト、ファ
when
ン
we
クションオブジェク
save,
トを作って、
we're
そ
once
こで
again
関数でする。
going to see
まあ、そ
hello
の実行
Coursera.
成果だな、かっこよくとる。
And I could certainly even pass parameters to it. For example, if this function wanted a name to be passed to it, and instead of just saying say hello, I'll just say hello plus name. So if I execute it right now, what do you think it's going to say? It's going to say hello
まあ、undefined
undefined.
だ。
Why is that? Well, because it's asking for a name to be passed to it, and we're passing nothing to it. So let's go ahead and pass Coursera. And when we
うわ
save, it
ー、そ
will
うなる
say
な。
once again, hello Coursera.
これ、ファンクショ
So
ンネー
in
ム
the
合って
same
るから、
vein,
その
let me go
必
ahead
要
and
こうなっ
comment
てる。
this out.
で、こちらが。なるほど。
So you have your record, so to speak. And I will uncomment the greeter. If I do this again, it still say hi and hi. So how can we separate them? Well, if we go to script 1, we could wrap this entire thing with parentheses, function, and wrap this whole thing into a function. So now this whole thing is sitting inside of a function. Technically speaking, I could just
全部
indent
関
it a
数の
little bit
中
like
で入れ
this.
る。
So this whole entire thing is sitting inside of a function. And if I just leave it like this would be kind of bad because all I would be doing is declaring a function. Well, I don't want to just declare it. I actually want this code to execute. So in order to get this code to execute and execute just on load of script.swan.js, all I need to do is put parentheses behind it and put a semicolon. So now this is going to execute the second it loads. Now, if I save that, this is not really going to work. Why is that? Well, because in app.js, Yakov greeter that say hello is undefined, is not defined. So where is Yakov greeter? Because this is at this point is looking in the Windows object to see where Yakov greeter is, and Yakov greeter is not defined there because now we've put it in its own execution context. So Yakov greeter is only living inside of this function. So how can we expose this Yakov greeter to the window object? Well, we could go ahead and pass the window object as part of the parameters to the function, and we'll say window here. And at this point, when we say Yakov greeter, we can do that at the end. We could just say window, that's this window right here, dot Yakov greeter equals to Yakov greeter. So now what we've done is we've exposed our Yakov greeter object and we placed it into the window object. We kind of exposed it to the outside. So now when we're in app.js, Yakov greeter is indeed exposed to the outside. So let's go ahead and save that. And now you could see, hello, Yaakov, hi, John. And the truth of the matter is, even here, we still want to do the same thing. And in fact, let's go do it this way. Usually, the way I want to type it up is not try to wrap those curly braces all around. It's very confusing that way. But instead, do this. You have
グ
parentheses.
ロ
You
ーブ
know
じ
there's
ゃ
going to
か
be
ら
a function inside
こ
of
ういうエ
it.
クスプレッ
And I
ション
know
す
I'm
るこ
going to
と
want to
は、
invoke that function. So really, I'm going to put the parentheses right behind it and then put a semicolon at the end. So now all I need to do is declare this function, and the function is going to have the parentheses right behind the word function and curly braces. And now I could just open it up
こうい
and take this
う
entire thing, cut it out of here, and maybe even indent it, place it over here. Let's indent it a little bit more. And there it is. Except again, the junk greeter, we want to expose that junk greeter to the window object, to the outside. So we'll go ahead and pass the window object here and pass it in here. And now, right at the end, or we could do it right here, it doesn't really matter where, but we could do it right at the end. We could say that window dot junk greeter is equal to junk greeter. So the window junk greeter, we're creating a new property on the window object, and we're setting it to the junk greeter. That is the object that we set inside of this execution context of this function. So if we save that, and now we see, hello, Yaakov, hi, John. So notice we were able to use something that we want to expose outside. In other words, whatever we wanted to expose outside, we simply placed it as a property on this John greeter object. And whatever we wanted to use inside, like a greeting, so like almost like a private
これは
variable,
ディスと
we
か
could
なんか
still
付けら
use
れ
and we
て
could
くる
still
は
use
ずだ
it
よな。
inside the function, and we don't have to expose it to the outside. And at the same time, this greeting was not going to collide with this greeting inside the Yakov greeter, or inside this function, basically, but not inside the Yakov greeter, just inside this function, because each one of those variables is being defined in their own execution
まあ、形は
context,
一緒よ。
meaning
確かに。
in this function, and this greeting is being defined in this function. So what we've done is we've learned about namespaces, or at least how to fake namespaces in JavaScript, which is totally legitimate. And we also learned about how to utilize immediately invoked function expressions.
最後がちょっと、その前に、今の一回やっとかないと。だって、無名関数を使えばいい。ここカッコファンクション。ファンクション。ここがネームスペースで、レッドで、ファンクション読みかして、キスとやれば。こんな感じか。レッドは、イコール、実行結果。レッド、グリート。リーファンク、オブジェクトにして、じゃあ、ID is。つまり、このファンクションが中のオブジェクトに反する。押すわけだから、これを this でそのまま置き換えられるはず。例えば、this then name gred1 コールファンクションで、this 転生コンソールがヘログレーディング。こういうファンクションになり、このグリーターはこれ自分自身を返す。それでも、ファンクション自体を返すはず。どうかな。そうすると、インデックス1は、いった。ヘロ吹雪。でもヘロ吹雪やっちゃうか。ここセルフにしてみるか。リターンセルフ。そうすると、セルフ。これで、ヘロ吹き。同じことをもう一回やって。で、スクリプト2の方も、フリーにイコール、カッコの、パンチ。カッコ閉じてファンクションの実行結果を返す。無名関数にして、関数開始。そうすると、グリッターは、この中のセルフ、セルフ。ファンクション、コンソールログ、i 足す、セルフ点ね。です点ね。こうか。このファンクション、これが邪魔だ。これがこうなって、これで保存して、暗号でグリッター2、ちょっと待って。レッド、グリーター2イコールファンクション。リターンをしてないから、リターンセル。ファンクションそのままが返ってくるはず。これで、this になっちゃうんだ。うーん。ダンギス。変わらない。すると、これは、グリーター2になって、さっきのあれみたい。2やっといて、えっと、グリーター2イコール、 G、パンクイコー。F 点ね。F 点正解。コンソールログの配達 F 点ね。リターンにするリターン F として、レッド、K、R、クリーター。この場合、クリーターは中で S と F が入るはず。この場合は、エロを吹き配達するべきだ。同じことを、例えば、スクリプト JS。レッドグリーター1ファンクション、カッコスタイルタイトの、レッド F イコール、セルフの F 点ネーム。で、F 点正ヘロ。リターン F。これを何度やっていくと、これで、エンプティストリング。飛ぶ来た私が入って、別々に入って、問題なしとなる。おいち OK。そうすると、ここを、練習問題をやると、Immediately Modification can express are usually used to place according to its own execution context. Yes. Given frames. で、今の最後。Logic Method Removal。Given the window、ちょっと待って。そうか、window はこの場合、グローバルコンテクストがそこに入るから、Window のドゥエラにこれが入ったはず。まあいい、コピーしちゃおう。コピー。スクリプト JS に、ただね、一回、全部やって、ここに、ジュール高スピートから、新しいフォルダ、エクセ、サイズ、2バ、IIFE、イーフェに作ったから、EP、レクチャーアレーバル、インデックス HTML を、サイズ前に EF にコピー。で、メイク DIR の EF、JS として、 CP、レクチャー、あれ、じゃあ、入れといて。サイズ、JS のスクリプト、JS と。絶対にここは Git、MV、エクセサイズ1倍、エクセサイズ1倍、JS ベースと。まあ、そこエラー出るわな。一回これを全部閉じて、もう一回。よし。Git です。テスト、そう見ると、一応、めっちゃ下着咲こう。が、いたのを、しああ、いいのか。そして、あと、レクチャー、Git し、コーセラの MLCSSG。そこ、あれ、クロージャーよ、ように、JavaScript、書いた。そして、コードで、やるコード。起動。すると、エクササイズライブを一回全部消して、を一回全部書く。ペースト。邪魔やー。オブジェ、ドリームオンという関数は、ウィンドウで、これを実行して、これを実行してみると、ドリームオンが実行するから、コンテキストは、エラー出た。 このウィンドウが、そっか、段取りになるからか。ファンクション、ウィンドウ確認の。実行してないな。What if anything is missing from this code on order to get it to output message from anyone else? これ二つ。この関数がまず実行してないんだから、ここにカッコを書いて、ここにディスクウィンドウコンテキストを書けば、あれディスクはダメ？ウィンドウとしてやると、script.js。スクリプトとして、インデックス設定。ここはスクリプト JS だけ。そしてこれはいらない。で、ここのスクリプトもいらない。はい。IIF インスタントインプファンクションエクスプレッションか。これはここを、ここをエクスプローラーで表示して、すると、エラーは出てないかな。コンソール。エラープロミスプロセス。出た。ウィンドウだ。つまり、Windows でブラウザーと実行して、スコープをグローバルに渡さないといけない。だから、答えとしては、これをライン11にカッコウィンドウをかければいい。これやね。で、こうと。わけで、もうちょっと続けたいけど、C 式でもうすぐご飯なんなきゃいけないしか、手伝いしなきゃいけないので、ここまでにします。続きはご飯の後か何かでやる予定です。ではでは。というわけで配信終了して、